Hi, good morning, everybody. I wanted to go over some of the changes that have been happening in the recent years in terms of immigration and what that's meant in selection processes, as well as in some of the attitudes towards immigrants that are arriving, and what that might mean for services, especially for those for employment-related. Most of you have probably heard about West, so I won't go into our history or anything like that, but it is, I think, interesting that in the past few years, the amount of services that we've offered have increased tremendously because of the government's decision to require skilled immigrants who are applying to Canada to have a credential assessment of their education as well as a language assessment. And there are about 7 agencies in Canada that provide services for credential assessment, and we're one of them. But it's given us an opportunity to do a little bit of research on their motivations and expectations and service needs. We've also initiated a program called Global Talent Bridge, which really helps to link those people that we're seeing at early stages of their journey to Canada and link them with other services that are being offered both in Canada and overseas through various settlement and orientation programs. So way back, Canada has been one of the pioneers in trying to select for people who have high skills. And the points-based system back in the 60s is one of the first that was developed in the world. In the 90s, we shifted again from more a family to an economic class immigration. That's really continued until today. And then again, in the early part of this century, we shifted to really trying to select for human capital as opposed to trying to match people with jobs. I think it was determined that you really couldn't guess the labor market, so you picked people who had skills that could be flexible in terms of a changing labor market. And then again later we shifted towards what we might call a two-step immigration, where the majority of people who are coming to Canada are coming on a temporary basis, either as students or as temporary workers, and then invited to stay if they go through another set of procedural steps. Last year, they responded to I guess the slowness of the immigration process by creating what they called express entry, and the idea there was that people would apply online, they would post a profile, but rather than applying to come to Canada, they would wait until they were invited to apply. The thought being that this would speed up the process and bring the most highly skilled people, or the ones that met the points system to the highest degree, invite them to come first. And again, I guess just in the past month, there seems to be another shift going back towards more humanitarian immigration. There's certainly messages not just with responding to the Syrian crisis, but also trying to improve eligibility for people to be reunited with their families, either to come as family sponsored or for people who are here to be able to invite their family members. Just to give you a kind of a picture in graphic form of what that changes look like, you can see the 2 top lines. We don't have data for 2014 yet on that, but you can see the temporary numbers. The high number is the temporary workers, and the blue line is the students. And those are students that have just arrived or signed their permit in the year. The number of students actually present is over 300,000, closer to 350,000 this year. So the number of people who are on temporary basis is far outstripping those who are here, who have come in permanently. Also, the number of people who are shifting from temporary to permanent, I think during the first 6 months of the Express Entry program, I think it was 85% were selected from onshore. And just to go over that Express Entry program again, so those people who are interested in coming to Canada post a profile, the profile gives them a number of points for the whole human capital set of points, whether they be for age, education, previous employment, various factors like that. They're ranked in the system, and those that are ranked highest get picked on basically every 2 weeks. They go into this pool of candidates, and the ones that are at the top in terms of points get selected to apply to come to Canada. If they have a job offer or they have a provincial nomination, they can get almost half of the total points. 600 to 1,200 possible points would be given if they have that one of those two status. But job offers also require, for the most part, having a labor market impact assessment. So the employer has to prove if they're offering a job, that that person isn't displacing a Canadian who could do the job. International students have been seen as a potential for immigrants. The rules have changed a few times since they started to encourage students to stay as immigrants. The requirement for a labor market impact assessment is seen to perhaps limit the number of students that can make that transition, although I think it is probably too soon to tell because there hasn't really enough history of people being selected on the Express Entry program to know whether students are really being able to come through that system or whether they're being disadvantaged. But they are seen as a great potential. And as I said before, in the first 6 months of Express Entry, 85% of the people who were invited to apply for immigration were already resident in Canada. So this idea of a two-step process seems to be what's happening currently. Now, certainly in all the data that we currently are looking at, it doesn't appear that all the changes that have been made over time have really significantly changed the issue of skilled immigrants being underemployed or unemployed and earning less income in relation to people who are trained and educated in Canada. And the issues and the barriers seem to be similar over a great period of time. Non-recognition of credentials, communication skills. I mean, it kind of ranges from specific language skills to more, what you might call, cultural communication skills. Lack of Canadian experience, and employers feeling that hiring an immigrant is really a riskier proposition than hiring somebody who is Canadian-born or educated, and therefore putting them lower down the list of potential candidates. As I mentioned, that we've been seeing so many people who are applying to us, we've been getting a lot of data around the types of people who are applying to come to Canada. And we thought it would be important to try to find out a little bit more about them, trying to consider looking at what their motivations to come to Canada are, what their expectations in terms of barriers to success, the types of services that they would like to see. And last year we did this report called Considering Canada, in which we surveyed over 20,000 people, got a response rate of fairly high, and we discovered that that in fact the biggest pull factor for coming to Canada wasn't a job necessarily, but the safety, comfort, lifestyle issues. That people were looking for a better standard of living in a much more broader context than just employment. On the other hand, they were very optimistic about that the change of location coming to Canada would have a significant impact on their career, positive impact. And most of them thought they would find a job in their first year. But they did also expect the lack of a Canadian experience would be a barrier, and that they would consider changing their careers. They also were much younger and better educated than the previous year's cohort that came under the Federal Skilled Worker Program. So we did appear to be having people who were applying, or at least wanting to apply to come to Canada, who were younger, more highly educated, very positive in terms of their motivations to come to Canada. And interestingly, a lot of them are willing to pay for services. Now, that may be because they had already paid West, we're a fee-for-service organization, but they did appear that they were willing, if there were services that could help them in their career switch or their academic switch, they might be willing to pay for something. I don't want to go over the data a lot because we do have it online. It can be published, but it's published there. But I thought it'd be interesting to see that the top 3 motivations for coming to Canada were standard of living, better career opportunities, better educational opportunities, education for their children. Their expectations of the barriers, not surprisingly, they did see that not enough work experience was going to be an issue, lack of information about jobs, lack of licensure recognition, so they didn't feel they were going to be able to work in their field. So realistic expectations in that respect. At the same time, and I guess thinking what the barriers were also the expectations of what services they were going to be looking at or they would be needing. Number 1 was job placement services, also professional networking opportunities, and employment counseling. These were the top 3. As you can see, they were pretty equal in terms of their but I guess it was about 70% really were looking at those types of services as ones that were going to be important to them. We asked them what West could do, and we're not in the business of providing employment services, but we thought it would be interesting to know what they thought we could do so that we could help refer them to the services that they were looking for. Interesting, 80% was looking for a database of job opportunities and potential employers in Canada, but also information on, you know what my education is, now what could I do with that education? And we're looking to see what we can do with that information, because we do have a lot of information about what they've studied, and we can perhaps link them to types of careers that could use that education. Also, a lot of online services. We did a similar research of people who are already here. We found very much the same thing. With a large number of people, we wanted to know what barriers they had faced and what services they thought would make the biggest difference. And having local job experience was the most important thing for them. And also better networking. And it's interesting that the networking comes up a lot. I think people, both before they arrive and people when they arrive, realize the importance of the informal job networks that really help people find work. And I think that's one of the things that, as I said, it comes up a lot. They realize the importance. They don't have access to the networks that Canadians have. They realize that makes a difference. They're also using social media and web-based services more than we might have expected. We know that half of them, more than half, would look for an alternative career, but very few of them have taken part in any career planning activities before they left their home country. We also know that most people have links to employers at some point earlier because they've either been selected onshore as a temporary worker, or they're here as a student and are doing part-time work while they're doing their studies. International students are eligible for work off campus while they're in school, and also for extended postgraduate periods. We have found as well, though, that people who are students who are in postgraduate employment are typically in lower skilled jobs and not jobs that relate to the studies that they had. And the different services are going to be required at different stages of the process. Before they leave their home country, when they're here on a temporary basis, and as they transition to permanent status. Eligibility for services, access to services, information about services are all different at those periods of time. So if we were looking to what that might mean in terms of what kind of services might be useful or what we might consider changing or enhancing from already in place, certainly mentoring and internships would come to the top of the list. How do we link people to employers at an early stage so they have firsthand experience with immigrants in Canada? That may minimize the risk, and certainly, the experience of mentoring and internships have shown that those people who are connected to employers at some way early on have a better, a better chance and better success in getting the job markets. Also, we should be getting employment services and settlement services from what I call first contact. That could be overseas. It could be somebody here as a temporary worker or as a student. But if they're in Canada, if they're connected early on, their chances of success are going to be better. I know this is challenging because a lot of people aren't eligible for services until they become permanent residents. Also, I think that the service providers could engage with employers during the temporary period. I mean, we don't have a lot of experience with helping people who are international students access the employment market. The international student advisors aren't set up for that work, and settlement and employment service providers aren't eligible to get funded for that type of work. But if international students could be connected to employers in jobs that relate to their field, the chances of long-term success would increase. And it also may be worth considering what kind of specialized services employers would be willing to pay for, or what kind of specialized services certain types of immigrants would be willing to pay for, because there seems to be a connection. Already people are paying for access, maybe for registration fees for language training or for bridging programs, but we haven't really experimented with looking at what kind of specialized services employers could support or individuals could support if they had some long-term benefit or short-term benefit to get into an appropriate job. So I'll leave it at there, and you said questions will come later. Thank you.